There are some creatures out there that are so rare, so ancient, they almost feel like they belong to the world of myths. They've got this incredible armored skin, a single horn, and they are walking, breathing relics from another time. Today, we're going to get to know the Javan rhino, an absolutely magnificent animal that's living right on the razor's edge of extinction.
Just one. That's it. That's how many viable populations of Javan rhinos are left in the entire world. A single group, carrying the future of an entire species on its shoulders. And here it is. This is our star, caught on a camera trap. Getting a glimpse like this is incredibly rare. You're looking at a Javan rhino in Ujung Kulon National Park in Indonesia, which is quite literally the last place on Earth where this species has a real fighting chance. So, to really understand just how fragile their situation is, you have to first understand their last fortress. This is a story about geography, about history, and about a sanctuary that's under an unbelievable amount of pressure. And this map, wow, it just lays out the problem perfectly, doesn't it? Look at that huge area, their historic range, which used to cover so much of Southeast Asia. Now look at that tiny little black square on the tip of the island of Java. That's it. That is all that's left. It's created this single, terrifying point of failure for the entire species. So this place, Ujung Kulon National Park, you'll see called TNUK for short, it's everything. It's home to what we call a viable population, which basically just means a group that's big enough to sustain itself and reproduce without us having to constantly intervene. For the Javan rhino, this is the last one. And since this is one of only 5 rhino species on the planet, and one of the absolute rarest, protecting this park isn't just a local issue, it's a global one. Okay, so to really appreciate this animal, we need to dig into its unique biology, because this rhino isn't just some passive creature living in the forest. Nope. It's an active architect, literally shaping the environment around it. The Javan rhino has some really incredible features. The males have a single horn, sometimes it's pretty small. Its skin has these deep folds that give it that classic armored appearance. But its real secret weapon, the tool that's key to its survival, is that specialized upper lip. It's called a prehensile lip. You see, unlike a lot of other rhinos that might graze on grass down on the ground, the Javan rhino is a browser. It uses this super agile, almost trunk-like lip to reach up, grab onto branches, and just pull all those tasty leaves and twigs right into its mouth. It's a precision tool for a very selective eater. And get this, that prehensile lip is unbelievably precise. The rhino is specifically targeting twigs and branches that are only about 10 to 17 millimeters in diameter. So it's not just chomping away randomly, it's meticulously pruning the forest, picking out the perfect shoots. But it doesn't stop with just the small stuff. For those harder to reach leaves, the rhino will literally just push over or even uproot small trees up to 15 centimeters in diameter. It's a powerful force, completely reshaping the forest undergrowth just to get a meal. And here's the really cool part. This whole act of eating, it's not purely destructive. When the rhino breaks these branches or topples these little trees, the plants don't just die. They actually grow back, a lot of times even bushier than they were before. So in a way, the rhino is acting like this accidental forest gardener, stimulating all this new growth and making sure it has a constant supply of its own food. All right, let's talk about another key behavior. For a Javan rhino, getting all muddy isn't just about having fun. It is a critical, daily ritual that has this fascinating 2-part purpose. So, wallowing is all about survival and communication. First, the mud cools their bodies down, it acts like a natural sunscreen, and it keeps biting insects away. But it's also kind of like a social network. Rhinos will urinate in these wallows, leaving behind a chemical signpost that tells any other rhinos in the area who's been by. And they're smart about it too. They adapt this whole routine to the seasons. When it's the wet season and there are mud puddles everywhere, they wallow all the time. But during the dry season, they switch it up. They tend to bathe more in permanent water sources, which means their activity gets really concentrated around these crucial, life-sustaining parts of the park. And that brings us to the core conflict in the Javan rhino story. It's a tough paradox. The very isolation that's protected this last population from things like poaching is now its greatest existential threat. I mean, think about it. When you have every single individual of a species in one place, you're not just vulnerable to a tsunami or some disease outbreak. You're vulnerable to a much quieter, much more insidious threat, one that attacks from the inside out. And that's the loss of genetic diversity. This is the danger of inbreeding.
When you have a small, closed-off population, it's inevitable that relatives are going to end up breeding with each other. And over time, that shrinks the gene pool. It makes the entire species less fertile, more vulnerable to disease, and way less able to adapt to any changes in the future. And the science on this is crystal clear. As one study puts it, a population this small carries a very large biological risk. In other words, they are living on borrowed time, genetically speaking. So the obvious question is, right, why not just create a second population somewhere else? Well, it turns out the Javan rhino is incredibly picky about where it lives. Research shows that their ideal habitat has this super specific mix of soil acidity, water salinity, and closeness to the coast. Finding another spot that checks all of those boxes is a massive challenge. So what's the solution? What's the target number? Well, to maintain a healthy level of genetic diversity for long-term survival, scientists estimate a species needs an effective population, that means breeding individuals, of at least 500. And this was the estimated population back in 2007, 64. Now, the numbers have gone up and down a little since then, but the gap between where they are and the 500 they need for long-term security, it's just staggering. So the takeaway here is pretty clear, and it's really urgent. Saving the Javan rhino isn't just about stopping poachers anymore. It's become a race against a genetic clock. It's going to require incredibly careful management and some bold moves, like maybe establishing a second population to widen that gene pool before it's too late. And that really leaves us with the ultimate question. This is a species that has survived for millennia, shaping its own forest home in ways we're only just starting to understand. Now, with its entire future resting in one fragile basket, the responsibility really falls on us. What steps do we have to take to make sure this last unicorn of Java actually has a future?